Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Today on Feminine Roadmap, we are going to be talking about having courage and the desire to embrace the years before us with love and joy. This is going to be such an empowering and encouraging conversation, so please stay tuned. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today I have a joyful conversation. I have invited Dr. Carla Marie Manley back to the program today. We are going to be talking about aging joyfully. Now, Dr. Carla is a psychologist and an author of the book titled Aging Joyfully, A Woman's Guide to Optimal Health, Relationships, and Fulfillment for her 50s and beyond. So without further ado, I want to welcome you back to the program, Dr. Carla. How are you today?
I'm doing beautifully. Thank you, Gina. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so grateful that you said yes again to me. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is a pleasure. You and I had a whole conversation before we even hit record. So, you know, this topic of aging joyfully, you and I have connected on the idea that life is such a full and powerful experience. There's so much that we learn and grow and can do and be, and that age is just a number. You and I totally agree on that. So before I get super excited and get talking on the topic, why don't I pause and just say, all right, Dr. Carla, you wrote this book, Aging Joyfully. What was it that inspired you to talk about this topic, to write about this topic at this time?
What inspired me? Multitude of things. One is my own journey with aging. So it's always, to me, important to be writing from my heart about something that's meaningful to me. The other piece is my clinical practice and the women I work with, and men, but chiefly women in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, who are, even in their 20s, really struggling with this specter, this horrible demon of aging. And I think, why are we making it such a negative to age, right? So I wrote it from that perspective as well. And then also looking in my own world, at my girlfriends, at my sisters and my mother, you know, her aging process, and saying, how can I give a voice to the multitude of issues that arise? How can I take the mystery out of it? How can I support women? And how can I help us support each other? So that's where it came from.
It's so interesting that you mentioned 20s, 30s, and 40s and beyond, because as a professional makeup artist, I've worked on women of all ages, and I have had thousands of conversations. And in those conversations with women, some of them were with 23-year-olds who were holding up their face and worried about wrinkles, literally at 23, and thinking they should start doing treatment to their face like Botox or whatever. And the conversations going toward their fear and not knowing how to just live in their skin in their 20s. And so one of my things is I would say to people, and I still do, okay, you're 20. You're 50. If you're going to live to be 90, are you really going to be this unhappy with the fact that you're aging for the next 70 years, 50 years, 40 years? Or are you just going to find the joy in living today? If it's going to happen anyway, it's a blessing to be able to live life.
Absolutely.
It's really not as important as we think it is. And why do we do that? Why do we give age so much power?
I think we give it so much power. I mean, there's so much here, Gina. I mean, there's so much. But I think one of the reasons we give it so much power to the negative, right?
Yes.
Is because we live in a culture, in a society that has come to prize youth. It prizes youth in a way that other cultures and way historically we did not do it. We honored the maiden, well, first the virgin, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, the older, the grandmother. There was a wisdom there to be had. In our culture, we honor the virgin and maybe the maiden, right? But the other aspects, no, we don't want her. We don't want her once she's past her prime, so to speak. That's the mantra. And this is where it gets scary for women of all ages. What is our prime? Is our prime 15? And some people will tell you it is. There are some clearly, men and women out there who think that a girl at 15 or 16 is the best and everything else is downhill. That's pretty scary if we look at it that way. Instead of saying, wait, there are stages in a woman's life journey. Every stage is beautiful. Every stage is valuable and has something to offer. And if we get stuck on honoring only one stage, whether that's 18, 20, 25, 16, then we're missing the beauty and the wonder of all of these other stages. And how unfortunate is that? And so I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is we live in a culture that is very externally oriented, very much looking at the facade, the right house, the right car, the right wrinkles, which means no wrinkles. Your face is just sitting there like it can't move, right? And your cheeks don't move and you're barely your lips move, right? And that's okay, for somebody who wants that look, that's okay, but we don't all need to have that look in order to be lovely. Mm-hmm. And so in an externally oriented society, if we have one definition of beauty, which I believe in our culture, where we are with that right now, is slim, of a certain height, whatever that is, certain weight, athletic but not too athletic, feminine but not too feminine, and petite but not too petite, right? All of these things that make up this perfect woman. And ideally you're somewhere around stuck at 19 years old. That is a really difficult image and absolutely inappropriate image for the rest of us to try to be living up to or to model. So my idea with Aging Joyfully is for us to be able to look at health in a different way, beauty in a different way, and say what we want to focus on. Yes, we want to look pretty in the mirror for ourselves. Whatever that face is, right? Whatever the hair color is. You like gray, go gray. You like, very sort of stiff face that doesn't move, hey, go ahead, go for it. But that doesn't mean that there is only one way of looking beautiful. And so what is most important to me, Gina, and I believe this is the successful way because I see it in my practice, when we have beauty on the inside, that beauty, whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, beyond, radiates. But we focus on the external, and I think that's such a mistake.
You use the word wonder, and I love that word because there's a childlike curiosity to the word wonder. It opens up a perspective on life that has a sense of excitement and hope, right? We can wonder at the things that we've learned and the women that we've become and the experiences that we've had and how we bring those forward now into our relationships and the richness. We can wonder at the life we've lived and wonder at how we've evolved as women individually. And like you said, those internal beauties, those internal qualities that have been developed and just really kind of almost in my mind, you step back and you look at yourself almost like you're taking like a 360-degree view of a 3D object, right?
Yes.
And you look at your life and value with wonder what you've endured, accomplished, experienced, and give honor to the journey you've been on and know that it doesn't end because you had a birthday.
Absolutely. And I love how you're looking at it through that lens of wonder, because as I wrote Aging Joyfully, I had to be very careful, neurolinguistically, to make, I hope that any reader does not find the word youthful in there in the context of let's try to look more youthful, right?
The fountain of youth. This book is the fountain of youth. We're not going that route, right?
Right. No, no. It is about looking radiant.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really dovetails beautifully with the word wonder. Because when we're looking at our lives through the lens of wonder, of curiosity, of hope, of promise, then everything shifts. Everything shifts because we're lighter, we're more radiant. If, however, I've heard, 20, 30-year-olds in my office say, I'm afraid I'm not relevant anymore. I'm afraid I'm too old. I'm afraid I'm past my prime. And I'm looking and saying, wait a second, that's a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
As me in my 50s, hey, I'm not worried about my relevance. I'm worried that I might not, and I'm not even worried about it. Hey, if I have 10 more years on the planet or 20, hey, whatever it is. But there's so much to be relevant about when you're passionate, when you're curious, when your eyes are filled with wonder. If you believe in your life and in your power, you'll always be relevant, right? So,
Right.
and I think, going back to the idea of looking at aging as a process. And as you were speaking, I wrote down a word because you were talking about honoring, that knowing that each stage of life, again, kind of going back to the mythological sense of these stages of the virgin, the maiden, the mother, and then the elder or the crone, right? Each stage has its gifts.
Yes.
And if we look at each stage as a box to open that has these various gifts inside and look at those gifts with wonder, certainly they're not the same gifts we had when we were in our teens. But shoot, who wants those anyway? You couldn't get me to go back to my teens if you paid me, right? Or my 20s, 30s, or my 40s, right? Well, maybe my 40s because I was really changing and growing then. So that's the idea is, let's look at the paradigm, and I talk about this in Aging Joyfully as a jumping off point. Self-ageism. It is a term that I coined in working with the book. How much do we put ourselves in a box of aging ourselves and saying, I'm too old for this. I'm too wrinkled. I'm too this. How much are we doing that as women, no matter what the chronological ages?
Yes. In your book, in the introduction, I underlined this. It said, you and only you get to choose what, if anything, defines you as you age. The simple truth is one of the greatest benefits of being a mature woman. You are quite free to choose how you see and embrace this part of your journey. And I love the reminder that no one gets to tell you what your value is. No one gets to tell you you are relevant or not relevant or beautiful or not beautiful. We get to choose. And like a garment, we can put that on if we want to, that we aren't relevant and we're not beautiful. Or we can shed that garment, tell them, you can keep that for yourself if that's the garment you want to wear, but I can choose to be relevant and to be beautiful. I've often said, if you take, let's say, 10 beautiful women from around the world, right? Totally different cultures, tribal cultures, westernized cultures, third world cultures, just take beauty from any of them and you put them side by side. They are individually beautiful, but they look nothing alike. There is, especially in my world of beauty that I've walked in for so long, every woman in my chair had beauty. As far as I was concerned, people would think they would sit in my chair and I would judge them. But instead, I was looking for, oh, I love your nose. You have beautiful brow bones. I know that sounds weird, but when you're a makeup artist, the face is your canvas. And so there's structural beauty, right? There's textural beauty. Sometimes there's color beauty. The color of some people's skin is just magical, and it just is what it is. But beauty is such a broad term, and we want to narrow it down, like you said, to this one standard, which, by the way, no one meets that standard. So it's a unicorn to begin with. And second of all, I didn't even look like that when I was 19. It's impossible. I'm 5'11" and proportionate to my height. I will never be petite. It's absolutely physically impossible. So when do we let go? And when do we redefine what beauty is? It's up to us.
I love your question because the answer is now.
Yes.
When do we do it? We do it now. We do it now by saying, looking in that mirror and saying, I want to look good to me. Whatever that means to me. Not what a magazine says or another woman says, but when I look in that mirror, do I want, what is it that I want for my unique individuality? And stop striving. We as women, let us stop striving to meet this standard of perfection that is constantly shifting and changing and absolutely unattainable. It is driving us crazy. It is toxic. It is making us compare ourselves. And who is winning, right? Who is winning are the people who are selling all of the products that are trying to make us look like something that, quite honestly, we will never look like, and we don't need to look different than we are. My mother-in-law, she's in her 80s, and we went out to dinner on Monday, and she's lovely. She carries herself lovely. Probably is, she dyes her hair. I think that's probably the only thing she does. But just her face is this canvas of wrinkles, but it's, the girl at the counter said to me, she said, is that your mother? And I said, no, that's not my mother. I said, she's my mother-in-law. She said, she is absolutely gorgeous. And here she is, weathered, wrinkled, but it's her carriage. She carries herself with grace, with joy, and you look at her big, beautiful brown eyes, and they are filled with wonder. They are. She just looks around and she loves to garden and plant and do her things. She's not trying to be anyone she's not, and you see it in the way she carries herself. She is beautiful. I think she's turning 87. She'll be 87, I think. And that's the idea to me, is that honoring. And that comment came from a girl who was probably 23, 24. She said she is gorgeous. And I absolutely find my mother-in-law gorgeous because she's radiating comfort with her own being. She's radiating presence and radiating a sense of true grace. And I think that we can model as women, it's one of the beauties of being a woman, is that we can model grace.
I think of people like Grace Kelly, or Julie Andrews, the way that they carried themselves. It's magical, really.
It is
when
magical.
A woman is
and you picked my favorites. I have to add in my personal favorite, along with Grace Kelly and Julie Andrews, Audrey Hepburn.
I knew it. I was going to say, I know where she's going with this. Yes, There's something about them, and none of them look alike, but yet we see them all as beautiful and powerfully impactful women, very different from each other.
Yes. And all, aside from Princess Grace, all probably not classically beautiful, right? Audrey Hepburn, she would say that people thought at first she looked like an ugly duckling, or she thought she was. So it's really the carriage as women. And where does that carriage come from? All of the reading I've done about Audrey Hepburn, because again, she's my favorite. I don't have too many role models, but she is one of mine. And one of her quotes is, always be a first-rate version of yourself. And isn't that the truth, that at any age, you and I were talking beforehand about a core value of integrity. And to me, that is integrity. Always striving to be the first-rate version of me, knowing I'll have hiccups, stumbles, there are days I'll be quite imperfect, some more than others. But the idea is learning and growing with wonder, openness, integrity. And I believe that when we look at the role models of women who are meaningful to us, that often we'll find that they were filled with self-confidence, respect for self, for others, wanting to make a nice imprint on the planet. And so I think that that's, to me, that's the essence of aging, looking at each stage. And that, I believe, is what makes us radiate. When we're following our passion, when we're living a life well lived, when we're, let's say we find ourselves in an abusive relationship with a boyfriend, a partner, a boss, whatever it is, learning, embracing that as part of the journey and saying, me, no more, no more. Maybe I took it, and not being ashamed to say, I am going to change my life. I am a role model for my girlfriends, my children, the people who hear, whatever, hear me being yelled at or whatever it is. But looking at that as a privilege as a woman for us to model how to be in the world.
Mm-hmm. You talked about radiating true grace and comfort with our own being. There is something absolutely beautiful about someone who's blissfully unaware of themselves. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, they are so comfortable in their own skin that they're blissfully unaware. And they're not worried about what their hair looks like, how they're dressed. They're kind of embodying a space with such ease that you're drawn to them. It's very magnetic when a woman is that way. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, there are women who put on shame. They wear it like a cloak. Mm-hmm. They're ashamed of the way they look, or they're ashamed of their age, or they look back over the history of their life and they carry shame forward, and they so much lose that joy that we're talking about because the past is being drug along behind them, or they've slung it onto their shoulders like a heavy backpack. And how do we help women shed the shame? Because, we've all done things we wish we hadn't done. We've all said things we wished we hadn't said. And like you said, some people find themselves in relationships that are degrading and demoralizing. And one of the things that's heavy on my heart is to not just tell people, just live with joy. And I know that's not what you're saying either. I want people to hear that there's a journey to it. And if we struggle with shame and guilt, we can shed that. So with that in mind, I know from some of the stories in your book that you have walked with many women on that journey. And in order to age joyfully, or just to even have grace and joy, there is that issue of shame that a lot of women are wearing like a cloak. So how do you help women to first be aware that shame is their constant companion, and then two, how do they shed that shame so that they can live with joy and age with joy?
Deep breath in, deep breath out. Wow. You just went straight to the heart of things, Gina, as you are so gifted at doing. And as I was listening to you speak, I got, tears in my eyes and tears in my heart, because what you're talking about is such a poignant truth. And I love how you put it about wearing shame as the cloak. And you were talking earlier about these various garments that we put on as we age. And in my work, my private practice, my women's group, my volunteer work in drug and alcohol rehab, I would have to say that shame, which is a lack of self-forgiveness in my eyes, that's what I believe that shame is. And that's how I see it. And I really believe that from personal experience, from clinical experience. How do we shed that? Such a good question, because I believe that it unfolds this way. First, hey, you're human. You are human like anyone else. And I learned that truth when I was in doctoral school. I had had something really unfortunate happen to me. I was so ashamed and felt guilty. And I went to a professor that I trusted. And I said, Dr. So-and-so, this is what happened. I can't even focus on my studies. And he said, who are you not to forgive yourself? You are human. You made a mistake. Did you try to harm another person? Did you try to cause this? And I said, well, no. He said, then let it go. You're human. Who are you to be above the rest of us humans? I went, okay, thank you. And that was in the middle of a classroom. And I'll never forget it. So that was one of my first learning lessons on shame, is who are you to think you're not like me? I'm not like you. You're not so different. We are not different. There is nothing that has ever come into my office. I've seen a lot of things that I can't understand, that I have not experienced on some level in my own journey. So I have nothing to judge. How could I judge? I'm human too, right? So I think as we learn to shed that cloak of shame, one is, you're human. Give yourself a break. Be compassionate with yourself. Forgive yourself. The second is, find a women's support group. Find a girlfriend, find a therapist, someplace where you can realize that your story must be told. And in the telling of your story, whether it's to a therapist or and that's why I love women's support groups if they're confidential, right? Because as you're telling your story, the most common thing I hear at the end or during the support group is, oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. I have had that and I was afraid to tell anybody. Oh my God. And I thought I was alone. And once we realize as women, when we band together as women, we realize we are not alone. And so as we share our stories, that we realize we are just human on this very often lonely journey. And so I think that's the second part, is the sharing. And the third part is work it. Do your self-work, whether if you can afford it, get a self-help book like, the one on our first book together, Joy from Fear, or find another book, something that will help you work on your stuff. If you're in a situation where there's domestic violence, and research shows that 1 out of every 4 women you pass on the street, and I believe it's far more than that, is the victim of domestic violence. And people will say, hey, he's just yelling at me. He's just calling me names. He's just threatening me. He's just telling me what a piece of... That's not domestic violence. That is emotional abuse. And absolutely, is that violent to the spirit? Absolutely. And so finding that there are, through various outlets, healing groups for women who are suffering from not just physical abuse, and I'm not diminishing physical abuse, but emotional abuse as well. And I have had women who have been emotionally abused say to me, I wish I was black and blue. I wish I had a broken collarbone or a broken leg to prove that he's being abusive. And you don't need to have that. So that's a tangent. I don't mean so anyway.
No, but it's part of the shame, because it really is a real part of affecting how we see ourselves as women. And with that kind of behavior from someone that we love, we take it as truth when it's not. It's the brokenness in that person. So as we are dealing with shame, a lot of women probably carry shame, thinking that they really are not worthy because someone has been telling them that for years.
Right. And likely it started as a child and then morphed and grew, and they picked a partner who reinforced that, right? And so how do we get rid of that cloak of shame? Mm-hmm. We take the cloak off and realize that we are beautiful as we are. We are all wounded, some more than others, but we are all wounded. We all have our scars, and that using those scars not as something to be embarrassed about, but guys, this is one area where guys are pretty good role models. They'll show their scars and they'll go, cool, look at this, isn't this a great scar? This is how it happened. Yet when it's a psychic wound, we are afraid of that. And I have come with my, plethora of scars. I am able, in the right setting, of course, not with clients or whatever, because it's not appropriate, to be able to say, these are my scars, these are my wounds, and they make me who I am today. And without each one of those various scars and the learning, here's the important part, and this is how we make shame evaporate. As we learn from the scar, as we take the lesson and become stronger and more empowered, then the focus doesn't become directed at the scar or the shame. It becomes focused on the learning that was triggered by the situation. And so we're no longer, we might look back on it with like a little regret and say, oh God, I wish I hadn't done that, but I didn't know and I won't do it in the future. And then we become more powerful. And then slowly but surely through that process, we find that one day that cape, that cloak is way on the floor behind us. It's way back there. And if it tries to magically come and settle on our shoulders again, we got, nah, don't need ya. I'm doing great.
Yeah. The learning. When we know better, we do better. That is something that we need to give back to the idea of grace. Shame can't exist where grace resides. So it's the shifting, right? From the shame to the grace of, that's who I was. That's where I was. For whatever reason, I allowed it, or I chose that decision, that action, whatever. And then extending grace to ourselves that there was probably something there that drew us to the chaos or to the difficulty or to the challenge. And extending grace to ourselves to say, but we have the potential. Because we're talking about really learning to have the courage to go forward in life. And that's the reason this may feel like an aside or a bunny trail, but it's not. The courage to go forward is partnered with the courage to look back and to take forward what I want to do differently and how I want to show up differently. And that's the beauty of aging, is the further along this journey I go, Carla, the better perspective I can have should I choose to have it.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you said the piece about the courage, because it fits perfectly with your quote when you said, when we know better, we do better. And that, I just went, many of us know better, but we don't do better.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
We know that we shouldn't let our boss put his hand on our shoulder and say, oh, sweetheart, right? We know we shouldn't let our boyfriend or husband treat us horribly and be abusive physically or emotionally. So we can know that here, but we still allow it. I think that's part of where the shame comes from. Because when we stay in a situation that we know is toxic, but we're afraid to stand up, we're afraid of the repercussions, we're afraid of the conflict, we're afraid of the changes, whatever it is. And so when you brought in the piece about the courage to change, yes, when we know better, we do better, as long as we have the courage to put what we know into action. Mm-hmm. And that ties it together so beautifully, because that is how we get rid of shame. Shame can increase if we know better and we don't do better. Mm. And such an important, because I come across that in therapy with clients a lot, where you can see that they're learning, the knowing is coming, the information is coming, the awareness is coming. And then they almost go through this period of shame right there, because they're not yet willing, able, ready to take action. And so you support them through that low spot. Mm-hmm. That low spot of fear of change.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, they get the courage, they have, the support and the wherewithal, and then they start making changes one step at a time. That's where the cloak of shame gets left behind.
You talked about the power of self-esteem in the book.
Yes.
And I underlined some things. And you said a person's level of self-esteem tends to reflect the individual's core, overarching sense of personal value. So self-esteem generally stems from two arenas: an individual's sense of self-worth coupled with the individual's perception of being valued by others. And that's coupled with what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
And because other people have a say naturally in how we feel about ourselves, there is this journey of, like you said, having the courage to stand up and speak up and say, it's okay for me to say, I'm worth more than that.
Absolutely. And that's, I love how you keep using the word courage, because courage is so tied to self-esteem, because, just briefly, self-esteem is not the same as self-confidence, and we often confuse the two and use them interchangeably. And self-confidence is generally feeling good about yourself in one or two key areas of life. Hey, I'm good at soccer. Hey, I look pretty in the mirror. Hey, I am a good cook. Hey, I'm a good business person, whatever those are. And yet here's the scary part of self-confidence. If any of those things are taken away, your makeup is off, or you start aging, or you retire, or you're fired from your job. If that is your source of self-confidence, when that is taken away, it goes away. And that is why you can have somebody who looks self-confident, and then as you get to know them, they're all made up perfectly, or they look handsome and drive the right car and this and that. But then when you get to know them, you're like, wait a second, there's something wrong here. They don't really have a good sense of self. That's because they don't have self-esteem. Self-esteem is not focused on the external. Self-esteem comes from, this is my definition of it, comes from knowing your truth, knowing your code, knowing your compass, and doing your best day in and day out to follow that. And when you make hiccups and mistakes, picking yourself up, doing what needs to be done to go forward, make amends, and continuing. That is why self-esteem is built. It's not given, it is built. And it's something that we have to work at day in and day out. And as you were saying earlier, when you see someone who's comfy in their own skin, that's generally the result of very strong self-esteem, because the person knows who they are inside and out, pretty unshakable, may get, a little shaken in certain situations, but can generally come quite readily back to center. And that takes courage to develop, because it means, and you can see how it works to get rid of shame, because the more you come back to your truth and say, hey, I made this error, or hey, I've been in a life that was not acceptable for me or is not acceptable for me. I want to have the courage to baby step my way into the life of my dreams. That is how we create self-esteem. And then self-esteem, I believe, is a very close relative to joy. Because when we are comfortable with who we are, and we walk our talk and are living the life we want to live, we cannot help but access that true inner joy that is waiting for us.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking about self-confidence, the word that came to mind is transiency. If self-confidence is externally driven, then it's potentially very transient. It can come and go. And it's out of our control, if you will.
Absolutely.
It's that athlete who's, everyone thinks they're great. They get an injury and no one remembers who they are. Right?
Absolutely. And you see it day in and day out, where you have somebody who just looks beautiful or handsome, and then you get to know them and they're like, oh, I hate myself. Oh, I'm ugly when I take off my makeup. Oh God, no girl's really going to love who I am. And so they tell it often. There's a charisma, a story being told to the outside world, but inside is a big void.
Mm-hmm.
Often people who are just operating on self-confidence are very egocentric. And sometimes they're not egocentric and they're just very fragile. A sense of fragility of, God, if you just take away this sport, or you take away the money, or you take away the fancy car, what would they be? right? And we all, I think, have some of that in us, right? Because it's such a societal thing, but constantly working to not need that, not need it. If you have it, great, but not to not need it. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And what I'm hearing is that when we're talking about aging well, aging joyfully, aging with enthusiasm, just really looking at life as this grand journey, we have to release the power of others to decide. We have to build, like you said, that self-esteem, that sense of self, that internal knowing, because at the end of the day, who puts their head on the pillow? You do. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what other people say if you know who you are. And if I can get to the end of my day and I can say, I can see where I maybe didn't do the greatest thing, then I ask for forgiveness and I try to fix it as soon as I'm aware of it. I try to know better, do better. I try to show up in the world the best way I know how, because at the end of the day, I have to put my head on that pillow and I have to be at peace with who I am and how I showed up in the world. And I think that's the journey of self-esteem, is really, I kind of use the pillow. It's like at the end of the day, if I look over my day, I can see where I have been, what I've done, what I could have done differently. I have the courage to face that, correct what I can, and continue to move forward the next day.
Absolutely. And I love that image of the pillow because, you know, the pillow is that place where we go to dream, where the body replenishes, the brain cleanses itself, all of these things. And if we are not at peace with the quality of our day, we can't change what other people are doing. We simply can't. But we do have a great deal of control over our own processes. And that's why I think the beauty, one of the real beauties of being at an older age, right, is that you have more time. When I look at who I was in my 20s, you know, young, trying so hard to be a perfect wife and a perfect mama, to in my late 20s to, you know, brand new tiny boys. And I didn't have time, and working full time, I didn't have time to think about who I wanted to be as a person. I was just treading water, right? Just doing what I needed to do. And I think that's the case for so many people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And that's one of the beauties that we can realize. You don't actually have to wait to your late 40s or 50s or 60s to start doing this. You can actually start carving. And I wish I had known that earlier, that you can start carving out time in your day to say, who am I? I can give myself some self-care. I can have a cup of tea. I'll be a better person. I'll be a better me if I carve out a half hour a day, you know, 15 here, 15 here, 15 here, to check in with myself. How is my journey going? What is my journey about today? What words are going to guide my journey today? Is it compassion? Is it love? Am I going to choose anger? Am I going to choose stressing? What am I going to choose? How do I want to evolve? And to constantly have these conversations with ourselves. And that is, again, one of the benefits of being a little older, is that we have this awareness to say, wait a second, what's your moral compass? What are your life values? And take the time, be gentle with yourself as you learn what that is. You learn what all of that means to you. Write it out, which is why in Aging Joyfully and Joy from Fear, I do a lot of writing exercises. I give a lot of that so that people can pause, because otherwise it's just in your head. What is she talking about, right? But really, when we start pausing and treating our journey as an important aspect of our life, as important as our external appearance, more important, as important as paying bills and getting the laundry done. What about the laundry of our inner being? I like that, actually, looking at it that way. We need to do the laundry of our own inner being, and the ironing and the folding, and me, I like hanging my laundry out to dry when the weather's right, and being able to do that and let the breeze blow through our psyche. So
Hmm.
I really think those are beautiful images for us as women to know that all of that self-care, all of that self-compassion that we can generate by being mindful. And I know we were talking beforehand, and what a busy, intense life you have, trying to juggle so much and be so much, and realizing that your inner peace, your inner journey is also paramount.
Because we are aging whether we want to or not. Every day is a step forward down the timeline of our lives, right? And we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if we're going to, quote, have the time. We need to make the time. So when I think about this whole idea of aging joyfully, like you're talking about self-care and self-compassion, there are definitely stages where we're hamsters on a wheel. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we're running hard and running fast and crashing every night, maybe not getting enough sleep. But at some point, I think we can look back on that season and honor it for what it was. Remember the craziness, the late nights with the children, all of those things, juggling the work and the children. And how do I want to live now? What were the values that I had? I love the compass, because honestly, that point of joy comes from an innate knowing the direction I'm headed and who I am at my core. It will be difficult for me to have joy if everyone else gets to tell me who I am and what I am in the world. So as we practice that self-compassion that you talked about, you said pause and treat our journey as an important part of ourselves. That is the whole thing that motivated me to create this podcast, was to have these conversations about life and not being afraid of it, but embracing it and treating it like a dance. Sometimes the tempo changes, sometimes the music changes, just go with it. Find that rhythm in the season that you're in, and know that every season of life has its own joys and it has its own challenges. But without challenges, we don't know joy. We have to have the both. They're the yin and the yang. Like, we don't know what joy is until we've struggled. Like, we have to get to that place where we are recognizing that it's this beautiful dance, and it's not all easy. There is no pill. That's my point. Aging joyfully is a day-to-day decision to dance to the tempo of the music in the season that we're in, and to find the nuggets of wonder and joy and enjoyment, and what do I love, and making sure that we hold space for those things.
I just love everything that you're saying. And I love that you brought the seasons into it and dancing to the tempo of the season you're in, because that image of, the four seasons, again, it's tying in to, the mythology of the different life stages of women, and knowing that no season, in my eyes, is better or worse. I can find glorious parts of each season, right? And when I was in college, I lived in a town, I won't say I loved the town, but I started yearning for Northern California again, because there were no seasons in this area. It was all, pretty much the same.
Yes.
And kind of like an eternal summer. And I started having a yearning for the seasons. Why? Because each season has its gifts. And that is, to me, how so beautiful that you brought up that image. I just love it, because that is what aging is, that each season, we don't want to stay in spring. We don't want to stay in summer. I don't want to stay in fall or winter. And knowing that cycle of life, and as you so beautifully said, if we don't have our challenges, we get a little bit lazy, a little bit accustomed to the eternal summer, right? But we also miss those joys of the harvest and the beauty of the quiet of the winter, and all of those different pieces of the seasons and learning to dance within each season for its own beauty. I just love that you brought that up because it's so true.
I have a client in her 80s, and we were just talking about seasons, and I was encouraging her that this season is so unique for her. She doesn't have a job. Her husband has passed. She has time. She can reconnect with joy. She can release things that she's experienced. She can show up differently in her family's life. And she can take what she's learned and understand what they're going through from this perspective of experience and knowledge. And she can choose now to be that kind of guiding light, that stable place, that anchor, without it being a grandiose plan. But her season is giving her such a unique opportunity to minister to her family in a way that was difficult to do before because she had other responsibilities that required her to be focusing in different areas. And it's really beautiful to watch her grow in the confidence and the joy that she's having as she realizes what an honor and a blessing it is to be able to be that grandma, that mother, right? She is able to do things. She's able to talk to them, pray for them, because she's home. She's sewing, she's doing something. She can take the time to focus on each one of them. And it's bringing her such incredible joy that she hasn't felt like this in a long time. And it's been a journey of the courageous change. It's been a journey of wrestling with aging, but really realizing that, you know what? Look what you can do. And there is part of aging joyfully. Instead of lamenting what you can't do or imagining that you can't do, because sometimes it's imaginary, you dance with it. You give it a different perspective and you look for what can I do, and put the energy where you can instead of focusing on the can't.
Again, everything that you're saying is so beautiful and so on point because, the focusing on what you can't do is something that we often do when we're young. I can't do this. I can't drive yet. I can't do this. And then as we're aging, right, then, I can't run 20 miles anymore. I can't do this. I can't do that. Well, again, like you said, it's that shift to, but I can volunteer. I can walk, 3 blocks. I can do a gentle yoga class. So again, and I really highlight the importance of that in Aging Joyfully, of really watching neurolinguistically the power of your words and the power of how that's orienting you. And I love that you were talking about the woman in her 80s, because I don't want to miss that important piece that older, our ancestors prized grandmothers. Often there were 3 generations, 4 generations in one household. And the grandmother was the go-to. She was the lap to sit on. She was the comforter. And then as we've become increasingly fragmented and really independent of our nuclear families and moved that way, we have lost so much of that support and connection for not just our little ones, but for ourselves. Grandma might be in an old folks home, 100 miles away, and knowing how much value there is in having the ability. I'm not a grandmother, but the ability. I have so many friends who are older than I am who are already moving into grandmother years, and they'll say what a privilege and a joy it is while their daughter's working. They'll take the child or children, and not only is that a privilege, and I love the word that you used where you said the client was ministering to her family. And what an honor and a beautiful word that we've lost in many ways, right? That ability to minister, and how important that role is. It is a new role as one gets older, right? But to have the time and the ability, not to be a babysitter, but to parent, to grandparent, to minister in a world that's highly fragmented. And to me, that is not only a privilege, but it's an important role that our culture, that we as women can really come to value, that we can see, you know, I don't want to go negative, but we can see with a lot that's going on in society, whether it's mass shootings or, you know, whatever, there's a lot of children out there who aren't being parented or aren't being parented appropriately. And that's one of the beautiful things I see with women as we age. We have the right, we have the responsibility, we have the privilege, the honor, and the duty of modeling what it is to be a conscientious, beautiful, graceful, beautiful on the inside woman who is out there volunteering, being the change that we want to see in the world on whatever level we can do. And one of the ways you are doing that is to make podcasts available to help spread the word about what our power is. We're not losing power as we age. We're gaining power. It's like, it's magnificent.
And you know, I did this activity with some young girls. They were high school girls, and we were doing a talk about beauty. And I had a dry erase board, and I said, okay, let's talk about what beauty is. And of course, you know, the typical conversation happens, and I write everything down on the board. So I'm writing what they say down on the board, and then I flip it over, and I said, okay, I want you to think of 2 or 3 women, older women, not girls in your age group, but just, you know, just think about older. And what do you think of their beauty? Why do you think they're beautiful? And the list was completely different. It was all internal qualities. And so at the end of that exercise, I was saying, why are we focusing here when what we actually value is over here? You know, we ride ourselves hard and put ourselves away wet and give ourselves no grace, no self-compassion, no patience. We hold ourselves to standards we cannot live up to. And we're all individually doing this. When I look at another woman and I think she's beautiful, that's actually the clue, if we're aware of that's the beauty, that's the goal. It's in the being, not in the having and the doing. You've heard it said, we're human beings, not human doings. And it's that idea that if we were to pause and do an exercise and just think about who are the women we admire and what is it that we admire about them, and write it down, and I bet you $100 it's not the size of their breasts or the shape of their nose. We might admire the way they look, but when we have to sit down and think about what do I love about this woman, it's going to be her warmth. It's going to be her compassion. It's going to be that laughter that comes from the center of her belly. It's going to be that twinkle in her eye. It's going to be the fact that when you're with her, you feel like you're heard, right? These are the things that as we mature, dare I say, if we mature well, we become more and more aware and accepting of the fact that that is the being. The things that we have been obsessing about for years are actually retarding our growth. They're stumbling blocks to the greatness that's within us and the beauty that's waiting to be unlocked. And other people can see it sometimes, and there's nothing to be afraid of. It's like a flower blooming. Let it bloom. Don't put it under a bushel. Let it come to its fullness of beauty, and that's what we are. We need to allow ourselves to come to the fullness of our beauty.
So beautiful, so true. Absolutely. And I just love the exercise that you did and the really embracing that it is, again, our inner qualities, not the external qualities. It is our inner qualities, those that are good and nurturing and kind and compassionate and wise and genuine. We were talking about, before the show, genuineness, all of that, that when we practice those qualities, when we work on those qualities, when we embrace those qualities, we cannot help but age joyfully.
Absolutely. And we have had such a rich and deep conversation. I think this podcast will be one of those ones that women may need to listen to a few times, because we're coaxing out of women, right? We're coaxing that beauty out of women with this conversation. And we're coaxing women out of the darkness of the lies of what beauty is and what we should be. And we're shoulding all over ourselves. And we're inviting women into, with this book, the conversations of the beauty of aging. And you have activities in there. It's a journaling. Everything has, an opportunity to make space for and investigate how we feel about something, how we perceive it. Maybe we've never really given it the time to know. So with this book as a tool, as well as this podcast, there's so much to take in. So after this conversation, what 3 things really in your heart of hearts do you want our listeners to really grasp today, not to miss? What are those gifts that you have for them to walk away with that can begin to put them on the journey of aging joyfully, or aid them on the journey if they're already on a joyful journey?
First gift, I would say, is really work daily on creating time for gratitude and self-compassion. Carve out time at the very beginning of your day, even if it's 5 minutes, because I believe that the beginning of the day sets the pace, the tone for the rest of the day, and the end of the day sets the tone for our, head to pillow time, our restoration time. So if we can cultivate at least 2 periods every day, if not 3, one in the middle of the day, it doesn't have to be long, to meditate, to pray, to journal, to give some gratitudes, that will really help you on your process as you blossom and continue to blossom, right? So that would be the first one. The second one is, I talk in the book about how we can band together as only women can do. And men band together in their own ways, in their men caves and doing men things. Women have this gorgeous gift of being able to band together soul to soul, heart to heart, just getting our truth out there. Band together with other women. Band together, create a weekly tea party or whatever it is, right? A time where you can be with other women, a reading group that you can use, maybe make your way through one copy of Aging Joyfully together, have your own copies, but something where you're doing together time as women. And it doesn't have to be reading, it doesn't have to be tea, it can be anything where you're just sitting and creating and being. Practice being in the comfort and the companionship of a kula that you can create, a group that you can create. And just as a pause, I look at how women in the past have often had that. They had their sewing circles, they had their bridge parties, they had their, baking parties where they would go home to home and, offer cookies and this and that. And we've lost so much of that connectivity. And we really invite women to start igniting that again. Bring it, band together with love, with fortitude, with compassion, not as a place to gripe and get political, but a place to be your beautiful, wonderful, feminine self so that you can get in touch with your feminine roadmap, right?
Right.
And so that's the second thing. And the third thing is to really watch yourself talk. Watch how you talk to yourself. Notice if you're telling yourself you should look anyway, or you can't do this, or you can't do that. Pay attention to your vocabulary, and when possible, try to shift it in a way that is loving, in a way that you would like somebody else to talk to you. So if you find yourself being critical or harsh, try to talk to yourself in a way that you would like, a loving mother, a loving girlfriend, a loving partner to talk to you. And you'll see that you'll then start talking to yourself in really beautiful ways, telling yourself, oh, I love you. Oh, you're amazing. Oh, you made this stumble. It's okay. Let's figure it out and go on. So those are my 3 things.
Create time for gratitude and self-compassion every morning and night. Band together with women soul to soul. Yes, not a gossip group, but a life-giving tribe of linking arms and helping each other through. So powerful. And then watch your self-talk. That is such a big part of our journey, is becoming aware. Our stories are so deep, we don't even know that they're running in the background, the things that we say about ourselves, and they're driving our decisions, and they really can block joy.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. As always, oh my goodness, Dr. Carla, what a joy our conversation has been today. I'm so on fire. I love this topic, and I really enjoy your fellowship as another woman in the world who has that same desire to see women free and joyful and embracing the gift of life. So thank you again. Thank you for sharing your book with me and for sharing your time in your life with me. I am honored that you came again just to spend time and walk along with me for this journey.
And I am honored that you had me on your show again. I am honored to be part of your tribe, and I am honored to share this journey with you and your listeners. So thank you. It's pleasure's all mine.
Such a joy. Today I have been talking to Dr. Carla Marie Manley. She is a psychologist and the author of the amazing book, Aging Joyfully, A Woman's Guide to Optimal Health, Relationships, and Fulfillment for her 50s and beyond. But of course, this book has wisdom and encouragement for women of all ages. And so if you head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 111, you will find hyperlinks to Dr. Carla, to her book, to the resources that we've talked about. And you can also, while you're there, please leave your name and email address. I would love to send you a gift for joining my tribe. If you head over to iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, or if you follow, comment, and rate on this podcast, and then share this episode. Take this episode into that idea of a group of women soul to soul. Listen to it together. Process through the conversation together. Create the community of women who are aging joyfully. Be willing to lean into the gift that is today. As always, don't stop. Keep going. Do more, be more, live life with joy, live life with integrity. Find other women who are on that journey and take them with you. Grab a cup of something wonderful and a group of women. Have this conversation, share this conversation, and let's turn the tide about aging and create a powerful army of women who are marching forward with joy and shining the light for those who are following along behind us. So thank you so much for joining Dr. Carla and I today. And I am looking forward to sharing more wisdom, more joy, and more life-giving information with you next week. So until then, have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.